Threads, one of the most neglected aspects of fly tying today. What a lot of tyers don't realize is that you need to control the thread while you're tying with it. They call it thread control. A lot of people think that thread control has to do with thread tension, and to a certain degree it does, but it's also got to do with physically controlling what the thread's doing while you're working with it. Okay, now what happens when you wrap thread is that it actually twists up, and I'm going to show you this. If I take a piece of flat gold tinsel and I wrap this onto the hook and I literally just wrap, you'll actually see it twisting up. You can see the thread twisting up. Now what happens is when that thread twists up like this, you end up using more thread. Okay, so how do you keep the thread coming in flat? This is how you do it. You let the bobbin holder hang, and what it'll do is it'll actually untwist the thread. And you can help it along slightly by unspinning it like this. Okay, and you'll see it's now flat. And by consciously doing that, you'll keep bulk to a minimum and have more control. I try to use the thinnest thread I can get away with. I don't use many threads. I use a Danville 6.0 flat unwaxed, and I like that in a white. I'll tell you now why. I like Griffith Shear 14.0, and I like Unitrico 17.0 for the really tiny things. And then sometimes I also use Danville's 140 denier flat unwaxed. Why I like white thread? What happens when materials get wet is that sometimes if your thread is dark, the materials actually show up darker, but with a white thread they retain their natural color, and that's why I like white threads. If the white thread head is a problem for you, all you have to do is add a dab of a Copic marker, and that's the solution. So threads are very, very important. Don't neglect them, and understand what good thread control is. CDC, translated, cul de canard, feather from a duck's bum. Now we all know the feathers don't really come from the duck's bum. They're actually situated around the preen gland of the bird. And what makes these feathers unique is their structure. You've got these fibers along the feather stem, and all these fibers have tiny little barbules on them, and these barbules trap microbubbles, which keep the flies floating beautifully. So what you're looking for when you buy CDC is you want feathers with a large fiber count along the stem, with lots of fine little barbules on each fiber. You also want a feather that doesn't have limp fibers. It mustn't be too soft, or it mustn't be downy, like pillow fluff. That you don't want. You'll notice even though the feather is soft, it still has a little bit of structure, and that's quite important. Now the feather I'm holding is from what they call a Grand Canard. You'll notice the feather stem here is quite thick, so it's not the ideal feather to use if you want to hackle with the feather, but if you divorce the fibers from the feather stem and use them in split thread techniques or stack them, they're great. If you are going to hackle with the feathers, like the Swiss do, then you need smaller feathers with thinner, suppler stems. The Swiss used to use what they call croupions, but these are almost unavailable nowadays. The closest thing to croupions are what they call jura. Form follows function. CDC is no different. Elk hair and deer hair. I love using hair for wings on things like elk hair caddises or even hoppers. But there are a couple of things I look for when tying with hair. The first thing is this. I look for hair with clean tips. Then I look for hair with straight fibers. Now I'm not talking about frizz. Frizz is fine. The hair mustn't be bent. It's very difficult to work with it like that. The hair must also not be too soft. Now, if you actually squeeze on the hair patch like this, it should have a sponge-like texture or feel to it. It mustn't be soft like a dog's hair. Okay? And that's what I look for in hair. Hackle. Good quality dry fly hackle is very important stuff, because without it your fly will simply not work the way it's supposed to. It won't float. What hackle does is it offers you structure. Now there are two brands of hackle I trust. That's Collins and Whiting's. If you want a large variety of hackle sizes, then capes are a good idea, because you have a lot of different sizes on a single cape. However, if you predominantly tie dries in a certain size range, then saddles are not a bad idea, because they offer you more material. So what does good dry fly hackle need to look like? This is what it needs to look like. Stiff fibers, soft, supple feather stems, consistent fiber length along the stem, minimal web. When you break the feather open like that, it should do that. These fibers shouldn't stick to each other, okay? Because structure is important. So that's what you look for in a good dry fly hackle. And the other thing, before you buy hackle, look at individual capes or saddles. No two birds are alike. So don't think because you're buying Whitings, they're all the same. They're not. Look specifically at the feathers on individual capes and saddles and buy the best you can get. So take your time, select decent quality materials. Rather have less materials, but quality materials which are versatile and cover a wide range of applications.